Chapter 1. The visitor, making his way unobserved through the crowded main laboratory of the hill, stepped up to within 6 feet of the back of a big Norwegian, seated at an electrono-optical bench. Drawing an automatic pistol, he shot the apparently unsuspecting scientist 7 times, as fast as he could pull the trigger, twice through the brain, 5 times closely spaced through the spine. "Ah, Garlane of Edor, I have been expecting you to look me up. Sit down." Blond, blue-eyed Dr. Nels Bergenholm, completely undisturbed by the passage of the stream of bullets through his head and body, turned and waved one huge hand at a stool beside his own. "But those were not ordinary projectiles," the visitor protested. Neither person, or rather entity, was in the least surprised that no one else had paid any attention to what had happened, but it was clear that the one was taken aback by the failure of his murderous attack. "They should have volatilized that form of flesh, should at least have blown you back to Arisia, where you belong." "Ordinary or extraordinary, what matter? As you, in the guise of Grey Roger, told Conway Costigan a short time since, I permitted that as a demonstration of futility. Know, Garlane, once and for all, that you will no longer be allowed to act directly against any adherent of civilization, wherever situate. We of Arisia will not interfere in person with your proposed conquest of the 2 galaxies as you have planned it, since the stresses and conflicts involved are necessary, and I may add sufficient, to produce the civilization which must and shall come into being. Therefore, neither will you or any other Edorian so interfere. You will go back to Edor, and you will stay there." "Think you so?" Garlane sneered. "You, who have been so afraid of us for over 2,000 million Tellurian years that you dared not let us even learn of you? So afraid of us that you dared not take any action to avert the destruction of any one of your budding civilizations upon any one of the worlds of either galaxy? So afraid that you dare not, even now, meet me mind to mind, but insist upon the use of this slow and unsatisfactory oral communication between us? Either your thinking is loose, confused, and turbid, which I do not believe to be the case, or you are trying to lull me into believing that you are stupid." Bergenholm's voice was calm, unmoved. "I do not think that you will go back to Edor. I know it. You, too, as soon as you have become informed upon certain matters, will know it. You protest against the use of spoken language because it is, as you know, the easiest, simplest, and surest way of preventing you from securing any iota of the knowledge for which you are so desperately searching. As to a meeting of our 2 minds, they met fully just before you, operating as Grey Roger, remembered that which your entire race forgot long ago. As a consequence of that meeting, I so learned every line and vibration of your life pattern as to be able to greet you by your symbol, Garlane of Edor, whereas you know nothing of me, save that I am an Arisian, a fact which has been obvious from the first." In an attempt to create a diversion, Garlane released the zone of compulsion which he had been holding, but the Arisian took it over so smoothly that no human being within range was conscious of any change. "It is true that for many cycles of time we concealed our existence from you," Bergenholm went on without a break. "Since the reason for that concealment will still further confuse you, I will tell you what it is. Had you Edorians learned of us sooner, you might have been able to forge a weapon of power sufficient to prevent the accomplishment of an end which is now certain. It is true that your operations as Lo Sung of Uygar were not constrained. As Mithridates of Pontus, as Sulla, Marius, and Nero of Rome, as Hannibal of Carthage, as those self-effacing whites, Alsaxerxes of Greece, and Menocoptes of Egypt, as Genghis Khan and Attila and the Kaiser and Mussolini and Hitler and the tyrant of Asia, you were allowed to do as you pleased. Similar activities upon Rigel IV, Valantia, Pallane VII, and elsewhere were also allowed to proceed without effective opposition. With the appearance of Virgil Sams, however, the time arrived to put an end to your customary pernicious, obstructive, and destructive activities. I therefore interposed a barrier between you and those who would otherwise be completely defenseless against you. But why now? Why not thousands of cycles ago? And why Virgil Sams? To answer those questions would be to give you valuable data. You may, too late, be able to answer them yourself. But to continue, you accuse me and all Eresia of cowardice, and evidently muddy and inept thought. Reflect, please, upon the completeness of your failure in the affair of Roger's planetoid, upon the fact that you have accomplished nothing whatever since that time, upon the situation in which you now find yourself. Even though the trend of thought in your race is basically materialistic and mechanistic, and you belittle ours as being philosophic and impractical, you found, much to your surprise, that your most destructive physical agencies are not able to affect even this form of flesh which I am now energizing, to say nothing of affecting the reality which is I. If this episode is the result of the customary thinking of the second-in-command of Edor's innermost circle, but no, my visualization cannot be that badly at fault. Overconfidence, the tyrant's innate proclivity to underestimate an opponent, these things have put you into a false position. But I greatly fear that they will not operate to do so in any really important future affair. Rest assured that they will not, Garlane snarled. It may not be exactly cowardice. It is, however, something closely akin. If you could have acted effectively against us at any time in the past, you would have done so. If you could act effectively against us now, you would be acting, not talking. That is elementary, self-evidently true. So true that you have not tried to deny it, nor would you expect me to believe you if you did. Cold black eyes stared level into icy eyes of Norwegian blue. Deny it? No. I am glad, however, that you use the word effectively instead of openly, for we have been acting effectively against you ever since these newly formed planets cooled sufficiently to permit the development of intelligent life. What? You have? How? That too you will learn too late. I have now said all I intend to say. I will give you no more information, since you already know that there are more adult Eresians than there are Edorians, so that at least one of us can devote his full attention to blocking the direct effort of any one of you. It is clear to you that it makes no difference to me whether you elect to go or to stay. I can and I will remain here as long as you do. I can and I will accompany you whenever you venture out of the volume of space protected by a Dorian screen, wherever you go. The election is yours. Garlane disappeared. So did the Eresian, instantaneously. Dr. Nels Bergenholm, however, remained. Turning, he resumed his work where he had left off, knowing exactly what he had been doing and exactly what he was going to do to finish it. He released the zone of compulsion, which he had been holding upon every human being within sight or hearing, so dexterously that no one suspected, then or ever, that anything out of the ordinary had happened. He knew these things and did these things, in spite of the fact that the form of flesh which his fellows of the Triplanetary Service knew as Nels Bergenholm was then being energized, not by the stupendously powerful mind of Drownley the Molder, but by an Eresian child too young to be of any use in that which was about to occur. Eresia was ready. Every Eresian mind capable of adult or of even near-adult thinking was poised to act when the moment of action should come. They were not, however, tense. While not in any sense routine, that which they were about to do had been foreseen for many cycles of time. They knew exactly what they were going to do and exactly how to do it. They waited. My visualization is not entirely clear concerning the succession of events stemming from the fact that the fusion of which Drownley is a part did not destroy Garlane of Edor while he was energizing as Grey Roger. A young watchman, Euconidor by symbol, thought into the assembled mind. May I take a moment of this idle time in which to spread my visualization for enlargement and instruction? You may, youth. The elders of Eresia, the mightiest intellects of that tremendously powerful race, fused their several minds into one mind and gave approval. That will be time well spent. Think on. Separated from the other Eddorians by intergalactic distance as he then was, Garlane could have been isolated and could have been destroyed, the youth pointed out as he somewhat diffidently spread his visualization in the public mind. Since it is axiomatic that his destruction would have weakened Eddor somewhat, and to that extent would have helped us, it is evident that some greater advantage will accrue from allowing him to live. Some points are clear enough, that Garlane and his fellows will believe that the Arisian fusion could not kill him, since it did not. That the Eddorians, contemptuous of our powers, and thinking us vastly their inferiors, will not be driven to develop such things as atomic energy-powered mechanical screens against third-level thought until such a time as it will be too late for even those devices to save their race from extinction. That they will, in all probability, never even suspect that the Galactic Patrol, which is so soon to come into being, will in fact be the prime operator in that extinction. It is not clear, however, in view of the above facts, why it has now become necessary for us to slay one Eddorian upon Eddor. Nor can I formulate or visualize with any clarity the techniques to be employed in the final wiping out of the race. I lack certain fundamental data concerning events which occurred and conditions which obtained many, many cycles before my birth. I am unable to believe that my perception and memory could have been so imperfect. Can it be that none of that basic data is or ever has been available? That, youth, is the fact. While your visualization of the future is, of course, not as detailed nor as accurate as it will be after more cycles of labor, your background of knowledge is as complete as that of any other of our number. I see. Eukonidor gave the mental equivalent of a nod of complete understanding. It is necessary, and the death of a lesser Eddorian, a watchman, will be sufficient. Nor will it be either surprising or alarming to Eddor's innermost circle that the integrated total mind of Arisia should be able to kill such a relatively feeble entity. I see. Then silence, and waiting. Minutes, or days, or weeks, who can tell? What does time mean to any Arisian? Then Drownley arrived in the instant of his leaving the hill. What matters even intergalactic distance to the speed of thought? He fused his mind with those of the three other moulders of civilization. The massed and united mind of Arisia, poised and ready, awaiting only his coming, launched itself through space. That tremendous, that theretofore unknown concentration of mental force arrived at Eddor's outer screen in practically the same instant as did the entity that was Garlane. The Eddorian, however, went through without opposition. The Arisians did not. Some 2,000 million years ago, when the coalescence occurred, the event which was to make each of the two interpassing galaxies teem with planets, the Arisians were already an ancient race. So ancient that they were even then independent of the chance formation of planets. The Eddorians, it is believed, were older still. The Arisians were native to this, our normal space-time continuum. The Eddorians were not. Eddor was, and is, huge, dense, and hot. Its atmosphere is not air, as we of small green Terra know air, but is a noxious mixture of gaseous substances known to mankind only in chemical laboratories. Its hydrosphere, while it does contain some water, is a poisonous, stinking, foully corrosive, slimy, and sludgy liquid. And the Eddorians were as different from any people we know as Eddor is different from the planets indigenous to our space and time. They were, to our senses, utterly monstrous, almost incomprehensible. They were amorphous, amoeboid, sexless. Not androgynous or parthenogenic, but absolutely sexless, with a sexlessness unknown in any earthly form of life higher than the yeasts. Thus they were, to all intents and purposes, and except for death by violence, immortal. For each one, after having lived for hundreds of thousands of Tellurian years, and having reached its capacity to live and to learn, simply divided into two new individuals, each of which, in addition to possessing in full its parent's mind and memories and knowledges, had also a brand new zest and a greatly increased capacity. And since life was, there had been competition. Competition for power. Knowledge was worthwhile only insofar as it contributed to power. Warfare began and aged and continued, the appallingly efficient warfare possible only to such entities as those. Their minds, already immensely powerful, grew stronger and stronger under the stresses of internecine struggle. But peace was not even thought of. Strife continued at higher and even higher levels of violence, until two facts became apparent. First, that every Eddorian who could be killed by physical violence had already died, that the survivors had developed such tremendous powers of mind, such complete mastery of things physical as well as mental, that they could not be slain by physical force. Second, that during the ages to which they had been devoting their every effort to mutual extermination, their sun had begun markedly to cool, that their planet would very soon become so cold that it would be impossible for them ever again to live their normal physical lives. Thus there came about an armistice. The Eddorians worked together, not without friction, in the development of mechanisms by the use of which they moved their planet across light years of space to a younger, hotter sun. Then, Eddor once more at its hot and reeking norm, battle was resumed. Mental battle this time, that went on for more than 100,000 Eddorian years, during the last 10,000 of which not a single Eddorian died. Realizing the futility of such unproductive endeavor, the relatively few survivors made a peace of sorts. Since each had an utterly insatiable lust for power, and since it had become clear that they could neither conquer nor kill each other, they would combine forces and conquer enough planets, enough galaxies, so that each Eddorian could have as much power and authority as he could possibly handle. What matter that there was not that many planets in their native space? There were other spaces, an infinite number of them, some of which, it was mathematically certain, would contain millions upon millions of planets instead of only 2 or 3. By mind and by machine they surveyed the neighboring continua. They developed the hyperspatial tube and the inertialess drive. They drove their planet, spaceship-wise, through space after space after space. And thus, shortly after the coalescence began, Eddor came into our space-time. And here, because of the multitudes of planets already existing and the untold millions more about to come into existence, it stayed. Here was what they had wanted since their beginnings. Here were planets enough, here were fields enough for the exercise of power, to sate even the insatiable. There was no longer any need for them to fight each other. They could now cooperate wholeheartedly, as long as each was getting more, and more, and more. And Philosaur, a young Arisian, his mind roaming eagerly abroad as was its wont, made first contact with the Eddorians in this space. Inoffensive, naive, innocent, he was surprised beyond measure at their reception of his friendly greeting. But in the instant before closing his mind to their vicious attacks, he learned the foregoing facts concerning them. The fused mind of the elders of Arisia, however, was not surprised. The Arisians, while not as mechanistic as their opponents, and innately peaceful as well, were far ahead of them in the pure science of the mind. The elders had long known of the Eddorians and of their lustful wanderings through plenum after plenum. Their visualizations of the cosmic all had long since forecast, with dreadful certainty, the invasion which had now occurred. They had long known what they would have to do. They did it. So insidiously as to set up no opposition, they entered the Eddorians' minds and sealed off all knowledge of Arisia. They withdrew tracelessly. They did not have such data, it is true, but no more could be obtained at that time. If any one of those touchy, suspicious minds had been given any cause for alarm, any focal point of doubt, they would have had time in which to develop mechanisms able to force the Arisians out of this space before a weapon to destroy the Adorians, the as yet incompletely designed Galactic Patrol, could be forged. The Arisians could, then even, have slain by mental force alone all the Adorians, except the All-Highest and his innermost circle, safe within their then impenetrable shield. But as long as they could not make a clean sweep, they could not attack, then. Be it observed that the Arisians were not fighting for themselves. As individuals or as a race, they had nothing to fear. Even less than the Adorians could they be killed by any possible application of physical force. Past masters of mental science, they knew that no possible concentration of Adorian mental force could kill any one of them. And if they were to be forced out of normal space, what matter? To such mentalities as theirs, any given space would serve as well as any other. No, they were fighting for an ideal, for the peaceful, harmonious, liberty-loving civilization which they had envisaged as developing throughout and eventually entirely covering the myriads of planets of two tremendous island universes. Also, they felt a heavy weight of responsibility. Since all these races, existing and yet to appear, had sprung from and would spring from the Arisian life spores which permeated this particular space, they all were and would be, at bottom, Arisian. It was starkly unthinkable that Arisia would leave them to the eternal dominance of such a rapacious, such a tyrannical, such a hellishly insatiable breed of monsters. Therefore the Arisians fought, efficiently if insidiously. They could not, interfere openly with Edor's ruthless conquest of world after world, with Edor's ruthless smashing of civilization after civilization. They did, however, see to it, by selective matings and the establishment of bloodlines upon numberless planets, that the trend of the level of intelligence was definitely and steadily upward. 4 molders of civilization, Drownley, Credegan, Nidanilor, and Brolentine, who in fusion formed the Mentor of Arisia, who was to become known to every wearer of civilization's lens, were individually responsible for the Arisian program of development upon the 4 planets of Tellus, Rigel 4, Valantia, and Pallane 7. Drownley established upon Tellus 2 principal lines of blood. In unbroken male line of descent, the Kinnesons went back to long before the dawn of even mythical Tellurian history. Connexa of Atlantis, daughter of one Kinneson and the sister of another, is the first of the blood to be named in these annals. But the line was then already old. So was the other line, characterized throughout its tremendous length, male and female, by peculiarly spectacular red bronze auburn hair and equally striking gold-flecked tawny eyes. Nor did these strains mix. Drownley had made it psychologically impossible for them to mix until the penultimate stage of development should have been reached. While that stage was still in the future, Virgil Sams appeared, and all Arisia knew that the time had come to engage the Adorians openly, mind to mind. Garlane Roger was curbed savagely and sharply. Every Adorian, wherever he was working, found his every line of endeavor solidly blocked. Garlane, as has been intimated, constructed a supposedly irresistible weapon and attacked his Arisian blocker, with results already told. At that failure, Garlane knew that there was something terribly amiss, that it had been amiss for over 2,000 million Tellurian years. Really alarmed for the first time in his long life, he flashed back to Edor, to warn his fellows and to make counsel with them as to what should be done. And the massed and integrated force of all Arisia was only an instant behind him. Arisia struck Edor's outermost screen, and in the instant of impact that screen went down. And then, instantaneously and all unperceived by the planet's defenders, the Arisian forces split. The Elders, including all the Molders, seized the Adorian who had been handling that screen, threw him around an impenetrable net of force, yanked him out into intergalactic space. Then, driving in resistlessly, they turned the luckless wight inside out. And before the victim died under their poignant probings, the elders of Arisia learned everything that the Eddorian and all of his ancestors had ever known. They then withdrew to Arisia, leaving their younger, weaker, partially developed fellows to do whatever they could against the mighty Eddor. Whether the attack of these lesser forces would be stopped at the second, the third, the fourth, or the innermost screen, whether they would reach the planet itself and perhaps do some actual damage before being driven off, was immaterial. Eddor must be allowed and would be allowed to repel that invasion with ease. For cycles to come, the Eddorians must and would believe that they had nothing really to fear from Arisia. The real battle, however, had been won. The Arisian visualizations could now be extended to portray every essential element of the climactic conflict which was eventually to come. It was no cheerful conclusion at which the Arisians arrived, since their visualizations all agreed in showing that the only possible method of wiping out the Eddorians would also of necessity end their own usefulness as guardians of civilization. Such an outcome having been shown necessary, however, the Arisians accepted it and worked toward it unhesitatingly. Chapter 2. As has been said, the Hill, which had been built to be the Tellurian headquarters of the Triplanetary Service, and which was now the headquarters of the half-organized Solarian Patrol, was and is a truncated, alloy-sheathed, honeycombed mountain. But since human beings do not like to live eternally underground, no matter how beautifully lighted or how carefully and comfortably air-conditioned the dungeon may be, the reservation spread far beyond the foot of that gray, forbidding, mirror-smooth cone of metal. Well outside that far-flung reservation there was a small city. There were hundreds of highly productive farms, and particularly upon this bright May afternoon there was a recreation park, containing, among other things, dozens of tennis courts. One of these courts was 3/4 enclosed by stands, from which a couple of hundred people were watching a match which seemed to be of some little local importance. 2 men sat in a box which had seats for 20, and watched admiringly the pair who seemed in a fair way to win in straight sets the mixed doubles championship of the Hill. Fine-looking couple, Rod, if I do say so myself, as well as being smooth performers, Solarian Counselor Virgil Sams spoke to his companion as the opponents changed courts. I still think, though, the young hussy ought to wear some clothes. Those white nylon shorts make her look nakeder even than usual. I told her so, too, the jade, but she keeps on wearing less and less. Of course, Commissioner Roderick K. Kinnison laughed quietly. What did you expect? She got her hair and eyes from you. Why not your hard-headedness, too? One thing, though, that's all to the good. She's got what it takes to strip ship that way, and most of 'em haven't. But what I can't understand is why they don't—" He paused. "I don't either. Lord knows we've thrown them at each other hard enough, and Jack Kinnison and Jill Sams would certainly make a pair to draw to. But if they won't— But maybe they will yet. They're still youngsters, and they're friendly enough." If Sam's pair could have been out on the court, however, instead of in the box, he would have been surprised, for young Kinnison, although smiling enough as to face, was addressing his gorgeous partner in terms which carried little indeed of friendliness. "Listen, you bird-brained, knot-headed, grandstanding half-wit," he stormed, voice low but bitterly intense. "I ought to beat your alleged brains out. I've told you 1,000 times to watch your own territory and stay out of mine. If you had been where you belonged, or even taken my signal, Frank couldn't have made that 30-all point. And if Lois had netted, she'd have caught you flat-footed, a kilometer out of position, and made it deuce. What do you think you're doing, anyway? Playing tennis, or seeing how many innocent bystanders you can bring down out of control?" "What do you think?" the girl sneered sweetly. Her tawny eyes, only a couple of inches below his own, almost emitted sparks. "And just look at who's trying to tell who to do what. For your information, Master Pilot John K. Kinnison, I'll tell you that just because you can't quit being Killer Kinnison even long enough to let two good friends of ours get a point now and then, or maybe even a game, is no reason why I've got to turn into Killer Sam's. And I'll also tell you, you'll tell me nothing, Jill. I'm telling you. Start giving away points in anything, and you'll find out someday that you've given away too many. I'm not having any of that kind of game. And as long as you're playing with me, you aren't either, or else. If you louse up this match just once more, the next ball I serve will hit the tightest part of those fancy white shorts of yours, right where the hip pocket would be if they had any, and it'll raise a welt that will make you eat off the mantle for 3 days. So watch your step. You insufferable lug! I'd like to smash this racket over your head. I'll do it, too, and walk off the court, if you don't. The whistle blew. Virgilia Sams, all smiles, towed the baseline and became the personification and embodiment of smoothly flowing motion. The ball whizzed over the net, barely clearing it, a sizzling service ace. The game went on. And a few minutes later, in the shower room, where Jack Kinnison was caroling lustily while plying a towel, a huge young man strode up and slapped him ringingly between the shoulder blades. "Congratulations, Jack," and so forth. "But there's a thing I want to ask you. Confidential, sort of." "Shoot. Haven't we been eating out of the same dish for lo these many moons? Why the diffidence all of a sudden, Mace? It isn't in character." "Well, I'm a lip reader, you know." "Sure, we all are. What of it?" "It's only that, well, I saw what you and Miss Sam said to each other out there, and if that was lovers' small talk, I'm a Venerian mud puppy." "Lovers? Who the hell ever said we were lovers?" "Oh, you've been inhaling some of Dad's balloon juice. Lovers. Me and that red-headed stinker? That jelly-brained sappadilly? Hardly." "Hold it, Jack." The big officer's voice was slightly edged. "You're off course. A hell of a long flit off. That girl has got everything. She's the class of the reservation. Why, she's a regular 1219. "Huh?" Amazed, young Kinnison stopped drying himself and stared. "You mean to say you've been giving her a miss just because—" He had started to say, "because you're the best friend I've got in the system," but he did not. Well, it would have smelled slightly cheesy, I thought. The other man did not put into words either what both of them so deeply knew to be the truth. "But if you haven't got— if it's okay with you, of course. Stand by for 5 seconds. I'll take you around." Jack threw on his uniform, and in a few minutes the two young officers, immaculate in the space black and silver of the patrol, made their way toward the women's dressing rooms. "But she's all right at that, in most ways, I guess." Kinnison was half apologizing for what he had said. "Outside of being chicken-hearted and pig-headed, she's a good egg. She really qualifies, most of the time. But I wouldn't have her, bonus attached, any more than she would have me. It's strictly mutual. You won't fall for her either, Mace. You'll want to pull one of her legs off and beat the rest of her to death with it inside of a week. But there's nothing like finding things out for yourself." In a short time Miss Sams appeared, dressed somewhat less revealingly than before in the blouse and kilts which were the mode of the moment. "Hi, Jill. This is Mace. I've told you about him. My boatmate. Master Electronicist Mason Northrop." "Yes, I've heard about you, Troncist, a lot." She shook hands warmly. "He hasn't been putting tracers on you, Jill, on account of he figured he'd be poaching. Can you figure that? I straightened him out, though, in short order. Told him why, too, so he ought to be insulated against any voltage you can generate." "Oh, you did? How sweet of you. But how— oh, those?" She gestured at the powerful prism binoculars, a part of the uniform of every officer of space. "Uh-huh." Northrop wriggled, but held firm. "If I'd only been as big and husky as you are," surveying admiringly some 6'2" of altitude and 200-odd pounds of hard meat, gristle, and bone, "I'd have grabbed him by one ankle, whirled him around my head, and flung him into the 15th row of seats. What's the matter with him, Mace, is that he was born centuries and centuries too late. He should have been an overseer when they built the pyramids, flogging slaves because they wouldn't step just so. Or better yet, one of those people it told about in those funny old books they dug up last year, liege lords or something like that, remember? With the power of life and death, high, middle, and low justice, whatever that was, over their vassals and their families, serfs and serving wenches. Especially serving wenches. He likes little, cuddly baby talkers who pretend to be utterly spineless and completely brainless, eh, Jack? Ouch. Touché, Jill. But maybe I had it coming to me at that. Let's call it off, shall we? I'll be seeing you two, hither or yon. Kinnison turned and hurried away. Want to know why he's doing such a quick flit? Jill grinned up at her companion, a bright, quick grin. Not that he was giving up. The blonde over there, the one in the rocket red. Very few blondes can wear such a violent shade. Dimples Maynard. And is she, cuddly and baby-talkish? She's a grand person. I was just popping off, so was he. You know that neither of us really meant half of what we said, or, at least... Her voice died away. I don't know whether I do or not, Northrop replied, awkwardly but honestly. That was savage stuff, if there ever was any. I can't see for the life of me why you two of the world's finest people, should have to tear into each other that way. Do you? I don't know that I ever thought of it like that. Jill caught her lower lip between her teeth. He's splendid, really, and I like him a lot, usually. We get along perfectly most of the time. We don't fight at all, except when we're too close together, and then we fight about anything and everything. Say, suppose that could be it. Like charges repelling each other inversely as the square of the distance. That's about the way it seems to be. Could be, and I'm glad. The man's face cleared. And I'm a charge of the opposite sign. Let's go. And in Virgil Sam's deeply buried office, civilization's two strongest men were deep in conversation. Trouble's enough to keep 4 men of our size awake nights. Sam's voice was light, but his eyes were moody and somber. You can probably whip yours, though, in time. They're mostly in one solar system. A short flit covers the rest. Languages and customs are known. But how can legal processes work efficiently, work at all for that matter, when a man can commit a murder or a pirate can loot a spaceship and be 100 parsecs away before the crime is even discovered? How can a Tellurian John Law find a criminal on a strange world that knows nothing whatever of our patrol, with a completely alien language, maybe no language at all, where it takes months even to find out who and where, if any, the native police officers are? But there must be a way, Rod. There's got to be a way. Sam slammed his open hand resoundingly against his desk's bare top. And by God, I'll find it. The patrol will come out on top. Crusader Sam's, now and forever. There was no trace of mockery in Kinnison's voice or expression, but only friendship and admiration. And I'll bet you do. Your interstellar patrol, or whatever. Galactic Patrol. I know what the name of it is going to be, if nothing else. It's just as good as in the bag right now. You've done a job so far, Verge. The whole system, Nevia, the colonies on Aldebaran II, and other planets, even Valeria, as tight as a drum. Funny about Valeria, isn't it? There was a moment of silence, then Kinnison went on, But wherever diamonds are, there go Dutchmen, and Dutch women go wherever their men do. And, in spite of medical advice, Dutch babies arrive. Although a lot of the adults died, 3Gs is no joke, practically all of the babies keep on living, developing bones and muscles to fit, walking at 1.5 years old, living normally. They say that the 3rd generation will be perfectly at home there. Which shows that the human animal is more adaptable than some ranking medicos had believed is all. Don't try to sidetrack me, Rod. You know as well as I do what we're up against. The new headaches that interstellar commerce is bringing with it. New vices, drugs, thionite, for instance. We haven't been able to get an inkling of an idea as to where that stuff is coming from. And I don't have to tell you what piracy has done to insurance rates. I'll say not. Look at the price of Aldebaranian cigars, the only kind fit to smoke. You've given up, then, on the idea that Aresia is the pirates' GHQ? Definitely, it isn't. The pirates are even more afraid of it than tramp spacemen are. It's out of bounds, absolutely forbidden territory, apparently, to everybody, my best operatives included. All we know about it is the name, Aresia, that our planetographers gave it. It is the first completely incomprehensible thing I have ever experienced. I am going out there myself as soon as I can take the time. Not that I expect to crack a thing that my best men couldn't touch, but there have been so many different and conflicting reports. No two stories agree on anything except in that no one could get anywhere near the planet, that I feel the need of some first-hand information. Want to come along? Try to keep me from it. But at that, we shouldn't be too surprised, Sams went on thoughtfully. Just beginning to scratch the surface as we are, we should expect to encounter peculiar, baffling, even completely inexplicable things. Facts, situations, events, and beings for which our one-system experience could not possibly have prepared us. In fact, we already have. If, 10 years ago, anyone had told you that such a race as the Rigelians existed, what would you have thought? One ship went there, once. 1 hour in any Rigelian city. 1 minute in a Rigelian automobile drives a Tellurian insane. I see your point, Kinnison nodded. Probably I would have ordered a mental examination. And the Polanians are even worse. People, if you can call them that, who live on Pluto and like it. Entities so alien that nobody, as far as I know, understands them. But you don't have to go even that far from home to locate a job of unscrewing the unscrutable. Who, what, and why, and for how long, was Gray Roger? And not far behind him is this young Bergenholm of yours. And by the way, you never did give me the lowdown on how come it was the Bergenholm and not the Rodebush Cleveland that made transgalactic commerce possible and caused 9/10 of our headaches. As I get the story, Bergenholm isn't even an engineer. Didn't I? Thought I did. He wasn't and isn't. Well, the original Rodebush Cleveland free drive was a killer, How I know, Kinnison exclaimed feelingly. They beat their brains out and ate their hearts out for months without getting it any better. Then one day this kid Bergenholm ambles into their shop, big, awkward, stumbling over his own feet. He gazes innocently at the thing for a couple of minutes, then says, "Why don't you use uranium instead of iron, and rewind it so it will put out a waveform like this, with humps here and here, instead of there and there?" And he draws a couple of freehand, but really beautiful curves. "Why should we?" they squawk at him. "Because it will work that way," he says, and ambles out as unconcernedly as he came in. Can't or won't say another word. Well, in sheer desperation, they tried it, and it worked. And nobody has ever had a minute's trouble with a Bergenholm since. That's why Rodebush and Cleveland both insisted on the name. I see, and it points up what I just said. But if he's such a mental giant, why isn't he getting results with his own problem, the meteor? Or is he? No, or at least he wasn't as of last night. But there's a note on my pad that he wants to see me sometime today. Suppose we have him come in now. Fine, I'd like to talk to him, if it's okay with you and with him. The young scientist was called in and was introduced to the commissioner. Go ahead, Dr. Bergenholm, Sam suggested then. You may talk to both of us just as freely as though you and I were alone. I have, as you already know, been called psychic, Bergenholm began abruptly. It is said that I dream dreams, see visions, hear voices, and so on, that I operate on hunches, that I am a genius. Now, I very definitely am not a genius, unless my understanding of the meaning of that word is different from that of the rest of mankind. Bergenholm paused. Sams and Kinnison looked at each other. The latter broke the short silence. "The counselor and I have just been discussing the fact that there are a great many things we do not know, that with the extension of our activities into new fields, the occurrence of the impossible has become almost a commonplace. We are able, I believe, to listen with open minds to anything you have to say." "Very well. But first, please know that I am a scientist. As such, I am trained to observe, to think calmly, clearly, and analytically, to test every hypothesis. I do not believe at all in the so-called supernatural. This universe did not come into being, it does not continue to be, except by the operation of natural and immutable laws. And I mean immutable, gentlemen. Everything that has ever happened, that is happening now, or that ever is to happen, was, is, and will be statistically connected with its predecessor event, and with its successor event. If I did not believe that implicitly, I would lose all faith in the scientific method. For if one single supernatural event or thing had ever occurred or existed, it would have constituted an entirely unpredictable event, and would have initiated a series, a succession of such events, a state of things which no scientist will or can believe possible in an orderly universe. At the same time, I recognize the fact that I myself have done things, caused events to occur if you prefer, that I cannot explain to you or to any other human being in any symbology known to our science. And it is about an even more inexplicable, call it hunch if you like, that I asked to have a talk with you today." "But you are arguing in circles," Sams protested. "Or are you trying to set up a paradox?" "Neither. I am merely clearing the way for a somewhat startling thing I am to say later on. You know, of course, that any situation with which a mind is unable to cope, a really serious dilemma which it cannot resolve, will destroy that mind. Frustration, escape from reality, and so on. You also will realize that I must have become cognizant of my own peculiarities long before anyone else did or could." "Ah, I see. Yes, of course." Sams, intensely interested, leaned forward. "Yet your present personality is adequately, splendidly integrated. How could you possibly have overcome, reconciled, a situation so full of conflict?" "You are, I think, familiar with my parentage?" Sams, keen as he was, did not consider it noteworthy that the big Norwegian answered his question only by asking one of his own. "Yes. Oh, I'm beginning to see. But Commissioner Kinnison has not had access to your dossier. Go ahead." "My father is Dr. Hjalmar Bergenholm. My mother, before her marriage, was Dr. Olga Bjornson. Both were, and are, nuclear physicists, very good ones. Pioneers, they have been called. They worked, and are still working, in the newest, outermost fringes of the field." "Oh," Kinnison exclaimed, "a mutant, born with second sight, or whatever it is?" "Not second sight, as history describes the phenomenon, no. The records do not show that any such faculty was ever demonstrated to the satisfaction of any competent scientific investigator. What I have is something else. Whether or not it will breed true is an interesting topic of speculation, but one having nothing to do with the problem now in hand. To return to the subject, I resolved my dilemma long since. There is, I am absolutely certain, a science of the mind, which is as definite, as positive, as immutable of law as is the science of the physical. While I will make no attempt to prove it to you, I know that such a science exists, and that I was born with the ability to perceive at least some elements of it. Now to the matter of the meteor of the patrol. That problem was and is purely physical. The pirates have just as able scientists as we have. What physical science can devise and synthesize, physical science can analyze and duplicate. There is a point, however, beyond which physical science cannot go. It can neither analyze nor imitate the tangible products of that which I have so loosely called the science of the mind. I know, Counselor Sams, what the Triplanetary Service needs, something vastly more than its meteor. I also know that the need will become greater and greater as the sphere of action of the patrol expands. Without a really efficient symbol, the Solarian Patrol will be hampered even more than the Triplanetary Service, and its logical extension into the Space Patrol, or whatever that larger organization may be called, will be definitely impossible. We need something which will identify any representative of civilization positively and unmistakably wherever he may be. It must be impossible of duplication, or even of imitation, to which end it must kill any unauthorized entity who attempts to imposture. It must operate as a telepath between its owner and any living intelligence, of however high or low degree, so that mental communication, so much clearer and faster than physical, will be possible without the laborious learning of language, or between us and such peoples as those of Rigel 4 or of Pallane 7, both of whom we know to be of high intelligence and who must already be conversant with telepathy. "Are you, or have you been, reading my mind?" Sams asked quietly. "No," Bergenholm replied flatly. "It is not and has not been necessary. Any man who can think, who has really considered the question, and who has the good of civilization at heart, must have come to the same conclusions." "Probably so, at that. But no more side issues. You have a solution of some kind worked out, or you would not be here. What is it?" "It is that you, Solarian Councillor Sams, should go to Arisia as soon as possible." "Arisia?" Sams exclaimed, and "Arisia? Of all the hells in space, why Arisia? And how can we make the approach? Don't you know that nobody can get anywhere near that damn planet?" Bergenholm shrugged his shoulders and spread both arms wide in pantomime of complete helplessness. "How do you know? Another of your hunches?" Kinnison went on. "Or did somebody tell you something? Where did you get it?" "It is not a hunch," the Norwegian replied positively. "No one told me anything. But I know, as definitely as I know that the combustion of hydrogen and oxygen will yield water, that the Arisians are very well versed in that which I have called the science of the mind. That if Virgil Sams goes to Arisia, he will obtain the symbol he needs, that he will never obtain it otherwise. As to how I know these things, I can't. I know it, I tell you." Without another word, without asking permission to leave, Bergenholm whirled around and hurried out. Sams and Kinnison stared at each other. "Well?" Kinnison asked quizzically. "I'm going, now. Whether I can be spared or not, and whether you think I'm out of control or not, I believe him, every word. And besides, there's the Bergenholm. How about you? Coming?" "Yes. Can't say that I'm sold 100%, but, as you say, the Bergenholm is a hard fact to shrug off. And at a minimum rating, it's got to be tried. What are you taking? Not a fleet, probably. The Boise or the Chicago?" It was the Commissioner of Public Safety speaking now, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. "The Chicago, I'd say, the fastest and strongest thing in space." "Recommendation approved. Blast off 1200 hours tomorrow." Chapter 3. The super-dreadnought Chicago, as she approached the imaginary but nevertheless sharply defined boundary which no other ship had been allowed to pass, went inert and crept forward mile by mile. Every man, from commissioner and councillor down, was taut and tense. So widely variant, so utterly fantastic were the stories going around about this Arisia that no one knew what to expect. They expected the unexpected, and got it. "Ah, Tellurians, you are precisely on time." A strong, assured, deeply resonant pseudo-voice made itself heard in the depths of each mind aboard the tremendous ship of war. "Pilots and navigating officers, you will shift course to 178-71253. Hold that course, inert, at 1 Tellurian gravity of acceleration. Virgil Sams will now be interviewed. He will return to the consciousnesses of the rest of you in exactly 6 of your hours." Practically dazed by the shock of their first experience with telepathy, not one of the Chicago's crew perceived anything unusual in the phraseology of that utterly precise, diamond-clear thought. Sams and Kinnison, however, precisionists themselves, did. But, warned although they were, and keyed up although they were, to detect any signs of hypnotism or of mental suggestion, neither of them had the faintest suspicion, then or ever, that Virgil Sams did not, as a matter of fact, leave the Chicago at all. Sams knew that he boarded a lifeboat and drove it toward the shimmering haze beyond which Arisia was. Commissioner Kinnison knew, as surely as did every other man aboard, that Sams did those things, because he and the other officers and most of the crew watched Sams do them. They watched the lifeboat dwindle in size with distance, watched it disappear within the peculiarly iridescent veil of force which their most penetrant ultra-beam spy rays could not pierce. They waited. And since every man concerned knew, beyond any shadow of doubt and to the end of his life, that everything that seemed to happen actually did happen, it will be so described. Virgil Sams then drove his small vessel through Arisia's innermost screen and saw a planet so much like Earth that it might have been her sister world. There were the white ice caps, the immense blue oceans, the verdant continents partially obscured by fleecy banks of cloud. Would there or would there not be cities? While he had not known at all exactly what to expect, he did not believe that there would be any large cities upon Arisia. To qualify for the role of Deus Ex Machina, the Arisian with whom Sams was about to deal would have to be a Superman indeed, a being completely beyond man's knowledge or experience in power of mind. Would such a race of beings have need of such things as cities? They would not. There would be no cities. Nor were there. The lifeboat flashed downward, slowed, landed smoothly in a regulation dock upon the outskirts of what appeared to be a small village surrounded by farms and woods. "This way, please." An inaudible voice directed him toward a 2-wheeled vehicle, which was almost, but not quite, like a Dillingham roadster. This car, however, took off by itself as soon as Sams closed the door. It sped smoothly along a paved highway devoid of all other traffic, past farms and past cottages, to stop of itself in front of the low, massive structure which was the center of the village, and apparently its reason for being. "This way, please," and Sams went through an automatically opened door along a short, bare hall into a fairly large central room containing a vat and one deeply upholstered chair. "Sit down, please." Sams did so gratefully. He did not know whether he could have stood up much longer or not. He had expected to encounter a tremendous mentality, but this was a thing far, far beyond his wildest imaginations. This was a brain, just that, nothing else. Almost globular, at least 10 feet in diameter, immersed in and in perfect equilibrium with a pleasantly aromatic liquid. A brain. "Relax," the Arisian ordered, soothingly, and Sams found that he could relax. "Through the one you know as Bergenholm, I heard of your need and have permitted you to come here this once for instruction." "But this, none of this, it can't be real," Sams blurted. I must be imagining it, and yet I know that I can't be hypnotized. I've been psychoed against it." "What is reality?" the Arisian asked quietly. "Your profoundest thinkers have never been able to answer that question, nor, although I am much older and a much more capable thinker than any member of your race, would I attempt to give you its true answer. Nor, since your experience has been so limited, is it to be expected that you could believe without reservation any assurances I might give you in thoughts or in words. You must then convince yourself, definitely by means of your own five senses, that I and everything about you are real, as you understand reality. You saw the village and this building. You see the flesh that houses the entity which is I. You feel your own flesh. As you tap the woodwork with your knuckles, you feel the impact and hear the vibrations as sound. As you entered this room, you must have perceived the odor of the nutrient solution in which and by virtue of which I live. There remains only the sense of taste. Are you by any chance either hungry or thirsty? Both. Drink of the tankard in the niche yonder. In order to avoid any appearance of suggestion, I will tell you nothing of its content, except the one fact that it matches perfectly the chemistry of your tissues. Gingerly enough, Samms brought the pitcher to his lips. Then, seizing it in both hands, he gulped down a tremendous draught. It was good. It smelled like all appetizing kitchen aromas blended into one. It tasted like all of the most delicious meals he had ever eaten. It quenched his thirst as no beverage had ever done. But he could not empty even that comparatively small container. Whatever the stuff was, it had a satiety value immensely higher even than old, rare roast beef. With a sigh of repletion, Samms replaced the tankard and turned again to his peculiar host. I am convinced that was real. No possible mental influence could so completely and unmistakably satisfy the purely physical demands of a body as hungry and as thirsty as mine was. Thanks immensely for allowing me to come here, Mr. You may call me Mentor. I have no name, as you understand the term. Now then, please think fully, you need not speak, of your problems and of your difficulties, of what you have done and of what you have it in mind to do. Samms thought, flashingly and cogently. A few minutes sufficed to cover Triplanetary's history and the beginning of the Solarian Patrol. Then, for almost 3 hours, he went into the ramifications of the Galactic Patrol of his imaginings. Finally, he wrenched himself back to reality. He jumped up, paced the floor, and spoke. But there's a vital flaw, one inherent and absolutely ruinous fact that makes the whole thing impossible, he burst out rebelliously. No one man, or group of men, no matter who they are, can be trusted with that much power. The Council and I have already been called everything imaginable, and what we have done so far is literally nothing at all in comparison with what the Galactic Patrol could and must do. Why, I myself would be the first to protest against the granting of such power to anybody. Every dictator in history, from Philip of Macedon to the tyrant of Asia, claimed to be, and probably was in his beginnings, motivated solely by benevolence. How am I to think that the proposed Galactic Council, or even I myself, will be strong enough to conquer a thing that has corrupted utterly every man who has ever won it? Who is to watch the watchman? The thought does you credit, youth, Mentor replied, unmoved. That is one reason why you are here. You, of your own force, cannot know that you are in fact incorruptible. I, however, know. Moreover, there is an urgency by virtue of which that which you now believe to be impossible will become commonplace. Extend your arm. Samms did so, and there snapped around his wrist a platinum iridium bracelet carrying, wristwatch-wise, a lenticular something at which the Tellurian stared in stupefied amazement. It seemed to be composed of thousands, millions of tiny gems, each of which emitted pulsatingly all the colors of the spectrum. It was throwing out, broadcasting, a turbulent flood of writhing, polychromatic light. The successor to the golden meteor of the Triplanetary Service, Mentor said calmly. The lens of Arisia. You may take my word for it, until your own experience shall have convinced you of the fact, that no one will ever wear Arisia's lens who is any sense unworthy. Here also is one for your friend, Commissioner Kinnison. It is not necessary for him to come physically to Arisia. It is, you will observe, in an insulated container and does not glow. Touch its surface, but lightly and very fleetingly, for the contact will be painful. Sam's fingertip barely touched one dull, gray, lifeless jewel. His whole arm jerked away uncontrollably as there swept through his whole being the intimation of an agony more poignant by far than any he had ever known. "Why, it's alive!" he gasped. "No, it is not really alive, as you understand the term." Mentor paused, as though seeking a way to describe to the Tellurian a thing which was to him starkly incomprehensible. "It is, however, endowed with what you might call a sort of pseudo-life, by virtue of which it gives off its characteristic radiation while, and only while, it is in physical circuit with the living entity, the ego, let us say, with whom it is in exact resonance. Glowing, the lens is perfectly harmless. It is complete, saturated, satiated, fulfilled. In the dark condition, it is, as you have learned, dangerous in the extreme. It is then incomplete, unfulfilled, frustrated. You might say seeking or yearning or demanding. In that condition, its pseudo-life interferes so strongly with any life to which it is not attuned that that life, in a space of seconds, is forced out of this plane or cycle of existence." "Then I alone, of all the entities in existence, can wear this particular lens?" Sams licked his lips and stared at it, glowing so satisfyingly and contentedly upon his wrist. "But when I die, will it be a perpetual menace?" "By no means. A lens cannot be brought into being except to match some one living personality. A short time after you pass into the next cycle, your lens will disintegrate." "Wonderful!" Sams breathed in awe. "But there's one thing. These things are priceless, and there will be millions of them to make. And you don't—" "What will we get out of it, you mean?" The Arisian seemed to smile. "Exactly." Sams blushed, but held his ground. "Nobody does anything for anything. Altruism is beautiful in theory, but it has never been known to work in practice. I will pay a tremendous price, any price within reason or possibility, for the lens. But I will have to know what that price is to be." "It will be heavier than you think or can at present realize, although not in the sense you fear." Mentor's thought was solemnity itself. "Whoever wears the lens of Arisia will carry a load that no weaker mind could bear, the load of authority, of responsibility, of knowledge that would wreck completely any mind of lesser strength. Altruism? No. Nor is it a case of good against evil, as you so firmly believe. Your mental picture of glaring white and of unrelieved black is not a true picture. Neither absolute evil nor absolute good do or can exist." "But that would make it still worse," Sams protested. "In that case, I can't see any reason at all for your exerting yourselves, putting yourselves out for us." "There is, however, reason enough, although I am not sure that I can make it as clear to you as I would wish. There are, in fact, 3 reasons, any one of which would justify us in exerting, would compel us to exert, the trivial effort involved in the furnishing of lenses to your galactic patrol. First, there is nothing either intrinsically right or intrinsically wrong about liberty or slavery, democracy or autocracy, freedom of action or complete regimentation. It seems to us, however, that the greatest measure of happiness and of well-being for the greatest number of entities and therefore the optimum advancement toward whatever sublime goal it is toward which this cycle of existence is trending in the vast and unknowable scheme of things, is to be obtained by securing for each and every individual the greatest amount of mental and physical freedom compatible with the public welfare. We of Arisia are only a small part of this cycle, and as goes the whole, so goes in greater or lesser degree each of the parts. Is it impossible for you, a fellow citizen of this cycle universe, to believe that such fulfillment alone would be ample compensation for a much greater effort? I never thought of it in that light. It was hard for Sams to grasp the concept. He never did understand it thoroughly. I begin to see, I think. At least, I believe you. Second, we have a more specific obligation in that the life of many, many worlds has sprung from a Arisian seed. Thus, in loco parentis, we would be derelict indeed if we refused to act. And third, you yourself spend highly valuable time and much effort in playing chess. Why do you do it? What do you get out of it? Why, mental exercise, I suppose. I like it? Just so. And I am sure that one of your very early philosophers came to the conclusion that a fully competent mind, from a study of one fact or artifact belonging to any given universe, could construct or visualize that universe, from the instant of its creation to its ultimate end. Yes, at least I have heard the proposition stated, but I have never believed it possible. It is not possible simply because no fully competent mind ever has existed or ever will exist. A mind can become fully competent only by the acquisition of infinite knowledge, which would require infinite time as well as infinite capacity. Our equivalent of your chess, however, is what we call the visualization of the cosmic all. In my visualization, a descendant of yours named Clarissa MacDougall will, in a store called Brenliers upon the planet— But no, let us consider a thing nearer at hand and concerning you personally, so that its accuracy will be subject to check. Where will you be, and exactly what will you be doing at some definite time in the future? 5 years, let us say? Go ahead. If you can do that, you're good. 5 Tellurian calendar years, then, from the instant of your passing through the screen of the hill on this present journey, you will be— Allow me, please, a moment of thought. You will be in a barber shop not yet built, the address of which is to be 1515 12th Avenue, Spokane, Washington, North America, Tellus. The barber's name will be Antonio Carbonero, and he will be left-handed. He will be engaged in cutting your hair, or rather, the actual cutting will have been done, and he will be shaving, with a razor trademarked Jensen King Bird, the short hairs in front of your left ear. A comparatively small, quadrupedal, grayish-striped entity of the race called cat, a young cat this one will be, and called Thomas, although actually of the female sex, will jump into your lap, addressing you pleasantly in a language with which you yourself are only partially familiar. You call it mewing and purring, I believe? Yes, the flabbergasted Sams managed to say. Cats do purr, especially kittens. Ah, very good. Never having met a cat personally, I am gratified at your corroboration of my visualization. This female youth erroneously called Thomas, somewhat careless in computing the elements of her trajectory, will jostle slightly the barber's elbow with her tail, thus causing him to make a slight incision, approximately 3 millimeters long, parallel to and just above your left cheekbone. At the precise moment in question, the barber will be applying a styptic pencil to this insignificant wound. This forecast is, I trust, sufficiently detailed so that you will have no difficulty in checking its accuracy or its lack thereof? Detailed? Accuracy? Sams could scarcely think. But listen, Not that I want to cross you up deliberately, but I'll tell you now that a man doesn't like to get sliced by a barber, even such a little nick as that. I'll remember that address and the cat, and I'll never go into the place." "Every event does affect the succession of events," Mentor acknowledged, equably enough. "Except for this interview, you would have been in New Orleans at that time, instead of in Spokane. I have considered every pertinent factor. You will be a busy man. Hence, while you will think of this matter frequently and seriously during the near future, you will have forgotten it in less than 5 years. You will remember it only at the touch of the astringent, whereupon you will give voice to certain self-derogatory and profane remarks." "I ought to." Sams grinned, a not-too-pleasant grin. He had been appalled by the quality of mind able to do what Mentor had just done. He was now more than appalled by the Arisian's calm certainty that what he had foretold in such detail would in every detail come to pass. If, after all this, Spokane, let a tiger-striped kitten jump into my lap, let a left-handed Tony Carbonero nick me, Mentor, If I do, I'll deserve to be called everything I can think of. These that I have mentioned, the gross occurrences, are problems only for inexperienced thinkers. Mentor paid no attention to Sam's determination never to enter that shop. The real difficulties lie in the fine detail, such as the length, mass, and exact place and position of landing upon apron or floor of each of your hairs as it is severed. Many factors are involved: other clients passing by, opening and shutting doors, air currents, sunshine, wind, pressure, temperature, humidity, the exact fashion in which the barber will flick his shears, which in turn depends upon many other factors, what he will have been doing previously, what he will have eaten and drunk, whether or not his home life will have been happy. You little realize, youth, what a priceless opportunity this will be for me to check the accuracy of my visualization. I shall spend many periods upon the problem. I cannot attain perfect accuracy, of course. 99.99%, let us say, or perhaps 10 nines, is all that I can reasonably expect. "But, Mentor," Sams protested, "I can't help you on a thing like that. How can I know or report the exact mass, length, and orientation of single hairs?" "You cannot. But since you will be wearing your lens, I myself can and will compare minutely my visualization with the actuality. For know, youth, that wherever any lens is, there can any Arisian be if he so desires. And now, knowing that fact, and from your own knowledge of the satisfactions to be obtained from chess and other such mental activities, and from the glimpses you have had into my own mind, do you retain any doubts that we Arisians will be fully compensated for the trifling effort involved in furnishing whatever number of lenses may be required?" "I have no more doubts. But this lens, I'm getting more afraid of it every minute. I see that it is a perfect identification. I can understand that it can be a perfect telepath. But is it something else as well? If it has other powers, what are they?" "I cannot tell you, or rather I will not. It is best for your own development that I do not, except in the most general terms. It has additional qualities, it is true, but since no two entities ever have the same abilities, no two lenses will ever be of identical qualities. Strictly speaking, a lens has no real power of its own. It merely concentrates, intensifies, and renders available whatever powers are already possessed by its wearer. You must develop your own powers and your own abilities. We of Arisia, in furnishing the lens, will have done everything that we should do." "Of course, sir, and much more than we have any right to expect. You have given me a lens for Roderick Kinnison. How about the others? Who is to select them?" "You are for a time." Silencing the man's protests, Mentor went on. "You will find that your judgment will be good. You will send to us only one entity who will not be given a lens, and it is necessary that that one entity should be sent here. You will begin a system of selecting and training which will become more and more rigorous as time goes on. This will be necessary, not for the selection itself, which the lensmen themselves could do among babies in their cradles, but because of the benefits thus conferred upon the many who will not graduate, as well as upon the few who will. In the meantime, you will select the candidates, and you will be shocked and dismayed when you discover how few you will be able to send. You will go down in history as First Lensman Sams, the Crusader, the man whose wide vision and tremendous grasp made it possible for the Galactic Patrol to become what it is to be. You will have highly capable help, of course. The Kinnisons, with their irresistible driving force, their indomitable will to do, their transcendent urge. Costigan, back of whose stout Irish heart lie Erin's best of brains and brawn. Your cousins George and Ray Olmsted. Your daughter Virgilia. Virgilia? Where does she fit into this picture? What do you know about her, and how? A mind would be incompetent indeed who could not visualize, from even the most fleeting contact with you, a fact which has been in existence for some 23 of your years. Her doctorate in psychology, her intensive studies under Martian and Venerian masters, even under one reformed adept of North Polar Jupiter, of the involuntary, uncontrollable, almost unknown, and hence highly revealing muscles of the face, the hands, and other parts of the human body. You will remember that poker game for a long time. I certainly will. Sams grinned, a bit shamefacedly. She gave us clear warning of what she was going to do, and then she cleaned us out to the last millow. Naturally, she has, all unconsciously, been training herself for the work she is destined to do. But to resume, you will feel yourself incompetent, unworthy. That, too, is a part of a lensman's load. When you first scan the mind of Roderick Kinnison, you will find that he, not you, should be the prime mover in the Galactic Patrol. But know now that no mind, not even the most capable in the universe, can either visualize truly or truly evaluate itself. Commissioner Kinnison, upon scanning your mind as he will scan it, will know the truth and will be well content. But time presses. In 1 minute you leave. Thanks a lot. Thanks. Sams got to his feet and paused hesitantly. I suppose that it will be all right. That is, I can call on you again if— No, the Arisian declared coldly. My visualization does not indicate that it will ever again be either necessary or desirable for you to visit or to communicate with me or any other Arisian. Communication ceased as though a solid curtain had been drawn between the two. Sam strode out and stepped into the waiting vehicle, which whisked him back to his lifeboat. He blasted off, arriving in the control room of the Chicago precisely at the end of the 6th hour after leaving it. "Well, Rod, I'm back," he began and stopped, utterly unable to speak. For at the mention of the name, Sam's lens had put him fully en rapport with his friend's whole mind, and what he perceived struck him, literally and precisely, dumb. He had always liked and admired Rod Kinnison. He had always known that he was tremendously able and capable. He had known that he was big, clean, a square shooter, the world's best. Hard, a driver who had little more mercy on his underlings in selected undertakings than he had on himself. But now, as he saw spread out for his inspection Kinnison's ego in its entirety, as he compared in fleeting glances that terrific mind with those of the other officers, good men too, all of them, assembled in the room, he knew that he had never even begun to realize what a giant Roderick Kinnison really was. "What's the matter, Verge?" Kinnison exclaimed, and hurried up, both hands outstretched. "You look like you're seeing ghosts. What did they do to you?" "Nothing much. But ghosts doesn't half describe what I'm seeing right now." Come into my office, will you, Rod?" Ignoring the curious stares of the junior officers, the commissioner and the counselor went into the latter's quarters, and in those quarters the two lensmen remained in close consultation during practically all of the return trip to Earth. In fact, they were still conferring deeply via lens when the Chicago landed and they took a ground car into the Hill. "But who are you going to send first, Verge?" Kinnison demanded. "You must have decided on at least some of them by this time." "I know of only 5, or possibly 6, who are ready," Sams replied glumly. "I would have sworn that I knew of 100, but they don't measure up. Jack, Mason Northrop, and Conway Costigan, for the first load. Lyman Cleveland, Fred Robush, and perhaps Bergenholm. I haven't been able to figure him out, but I'll know when I get him under my lens next. That's all." "Not quite. How about your identical twin cousins, Ray and George Olmsted, who have been doing such a terrific job of counter-spying?" "Perhaps. Quite possibly. And if I'm good enough, Clayton and Schweikert certainly are, to name only 2 of the Commodores. And Canobos and Dal Knowlton. And above all, how about Jill?" "Jill? Why, I don't—" "She measures up, of course, but at that, there was nothing said against it either. I wonder. Why not have the boys in, Jill too, and thrash it out?" The young people were called in. The story was told, the problem stated. The boys' reaction was instantaneous and unanimous. Jack Kinnison took the lead. "Of course Jill's going, if anybody does," he burst out vehemently. "Count her out, with all the stuff she's got? Hardly." "Why, Jack, this from you?" Jill seemed highly surprised. "I have it on excellent authority that I'm a stinker, a half-witted one at that, a jelly-brain with come-hither eyes." "You are, and a lot of other things besides." Jack Kinnison did not back up a millimeter, even before their fathers. "But even at your sappadilliest, your half-wits are better than most other people's whole ones. And I never said or thought that your brain couldn't function, whenever it wanted to, back of those sad eyes. Whatever it takes to be a lensman, sir," he turned to Sams, "she's got just as much as the rest of us, maybe more." "I take it, then, that there is no objection to her going?" Sams asked. There was no objection. "What ship shall we take, and when?" "The Chicago, now," Kinnison directed. "She's hot and ready. We didn't strike any trouble going or coming, so she didn't need much servicing. Flit!" They flitted, and the great battleship made the second cruise as uneventfully as she had made the first. The Chicago's officers and crew knew that the young people left the vessel separately, that they returned separately, each in his or her lifeboat. They met, however, not in the control room, but in Jack Kinnison's private quarters. The 3 young lensmen and the girl. The 3 were embarrassed, ill at ease. The lenses were, definitely, not working. Not one of them would put his lens on Jill, since she did not have one. The girl broke the short silence. "Wasn't she the most perfectly beautiful thing you ever saw?" she breathed. "In spite of being over 7 feet tall? She looked to be about 20, except her eyes, but she must have been 100 to know so much. But what are you boys staring so about?" "She?" 3 voices blurted as one. "Yes, she. Why? I know we weren't together, but I got the impression, some way or other, that there was only the one. What did you see?" All 3 men started to talk at once, a clamor of noise. Then all stopped at once. "You first, Spud. Whom did you talk to, and what did he, she, or it say?" Although Conway Costigan was a few years older than the other 3, they all called him by nickname as a matter of course. "National Police Headquarters, Chief of the Detective Bureau," Costigan reported crisply. "Between 43 and 45, 6 feet and a half an inch, 175. Hard, fine, keen. A big-time operator, if ever there was one. Looked a lot like your father, Jill. The same dark auburn hair, just beginning to gray, and the same deep orange-yellow markings in his eyes. He gave me the works, then took his lens out of his safe, snapped it onto my wrist, and gave me 2 orders: get out and stay out. Jack and Mace stared at Costigan, at Jill, and at each other. Then they whistled in unison. "I see this is not going to be a unanimous report, except possibly in one minor detail," Jill remarked. "Mace, you're next." "I landed on the campus of the University of Arisia," Northrop stated flatly. "Immense place, hundreds of thousands of students. They took me to the physics department, to the private laboratory of the department head himself. He had a panel with about 1,000,000 meters and gauges on it. He scanned and measured every individual component element of my brain. Then he made a pattern on a milling router just about as complicated as his panel. From there on, of course, it was simple, just like a dentist making a set of china choppers or a metallurgist embedding a test section. He snapped a couple of sentences of directions at me and then said, 'Scram.' That's all." "Sure that was all?" Costigan asked. "Didn't he add, 'and stay scrammed'?" "He didn't say it exactly, but the implication was clear enough." "The one point of similarity," Jill commented. "Now you, Jack. You have been looking as though we were all candidates for canvas jackets that lace tightly up the back." As though maybe I am. I didn't see anything at all. Didn't even land on the planet. Just floated around in an orbit inside that screen. The thing I talked with was a pattern of pure force. This lens simply appeared on my wrist, bracelet and all, out of thin air. He told me plenty, though, in a very short time. His last word being for me not to come back or call back. This of Jack's was a particularly indigestible bit, even for Jill Sams. "In plain words," Costigan volunteered, "we all saw exactly what we expected to see." Jill denied. "I certainly did not expect to see a woman. No. What each of us saw, I think, was what would do us the most good, give each of us the highest possible lift. I am wondering whether or not there was anything at all really there." "That might be it at that." Jack scowled in concentration. "But there must have been something there. These lenses are real. But what makes me mad is that they wouldn't give you a lens. You are just as good a man as any one of us. If I didn't know it wouldn't do a damn bit of good, I'd go back there right now and—" "Don't pop off so, Jack." Jill's eyes, however, were starry. "I know you mean it, and I could almost love you at times, but I don't need a lens. As a matter of fact, I'll be much better off without one." "Jet back, Jill." Jack Kinnison stared deeply into the girl's eyes, but still did not use his lens. "Somebody must have done a terrific job of selling to make you believe that. Or are you sold, actually?" "Actually, honestly, that Arisian was 1,000 times more of a woman than I ever will be, and she didn't wear a lens, never had worn one. Women's minds and lenses don't fit. There's a sex-based incompatibility. Lenses are as masculine as whiskers, and at that, only a very few men can ever wear them either. Very special men, like you three and Dad and Pops Kinnison. Men with tremendous force, drive, and scope. Pure killers, all of you. Each in his own way, of course. No more to be stopped than a glacier, and twice as hard and 10 times as cold. A woman simply can't have that kind of a mind. There is going to be a woman lensman someday, just one, but not for years and years, and I wouldn't be in her shoes for anything. In this job of mine, Well, go on. What is this job you're so sure you are going to do?" "Why, I don't know," Jill exclaimed, startled eyes wide. "I thought I knew all about it, but I don't. Do you about yours?" They did not one of them, and they were all as surprised at that fact as the girl had been. "Well, to get back to this lady lensman who is going to appear some day, I gather that she is going to be some kind of a freak. She'll have to be, practically, because of the sex-based fundamental nature of the lens. Mentor didn't say so in so many words, but she made it perfectly clear that— "Mentor!" the three men exclaimed. Each of them had dealt with Mentor. "I am beginning to see," Jill said thoughtfully. "Mentor, not a real name at all. To quote the unabridged verbatim, I had occasion to look the word up the other day, and I am appalled now at the certainty that there was a connection. Quote, mentor, a wise and faithful counselor, unquote. Have any of you boys anything to say? I haven't, and I am beginning to be scared blue." Silence fell, and the more they thought, those three young lensmen and the girl who was one of the two human women ever to encounter knowingly an Arisian mind, the deeper that silence became.